A wounded SEAL was bleeding out on a trauma table in the middle of the worst night the center had seen in months. The nurse in bright blue scrubs stepped forward with her kit, and he shoved her arm away. "Call someone experienced, not a nurse." The doctors watched. Nobody moved. Then she rolled up her sleeve. And the SEAL saw the tattoo, the insignia of a unit so classified that most generals don't even know it exists. He had seen that mark once before, on the shoulder of a mission commander during an op he was never allowed to talk about. His face went pale, his voice went quiet, and the room changed. If you've ever been dismissed by someone who had no idea who they were talking to, this story is for you. Hit that like button before this one ends. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from right now. I read every single one. And if you're new here, welcome to Secrets of Silent Badges. Subscribe and come join us. We're just getting started. The blood hit the floor before anyone moved. Claire Merritt had been watching it happen for 30 seconds. 30 seconds of hands moving too slowly, voices calling the wrong numbers, a resident standing at the trauma bay door like he had forgotten how doors worked. She did not move yet. She had learned a long time ago that moving too fast in the wrong direction was worse than not moving at all. Dr. Raymond Holt came through the double doors at 11:47 p.m. with coffee in one hand and a phone in the other. He was 44 years old and looked 60. His eyes had the fixed, flat quality of a man who had stopped being surprised by anything, including himself. "What do we have?" he said, not a question. "Multi-vehicle on Route 1, the charge nurse called back. 2 incoming, 1 critical." Holt looked at his phone. He did not look up. Claire was already at the supply cart, running a quiet inventory. She did it without thinking. Needle decompression kit, combat gauze, chest seals. Her hands moved by instinct, the way hands do when they have done a thing 10,000 times in conditions far worse than this. She did not count out loud. She never counted out loud. "Merritt," Holt's voice cut across the bay. "I need you on intake documentation." "Not playing with the supply cart." She turned. She kept her face neutral. "I'm checking supplies, Dr. Holt. We're low on 14-gauge angiocaths. We have residents for that. The residents are—" She stopped. She looked toward the door where the 2 residents were still standing, one of them on his phone. She said nothing else. Holt followed her gaze. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "Get back to your station." Claire walked back to her station. Back at her station. Intake form pulled up on the screen. Hands flat on the desk, kept very still, the way she had been taught to keep them still during long surveillance windows in places where movement meant death. The fluorescent light above her flickered twice. Outside, rain had started against the windows. Hartwell Memorial Trauma Center was not a bad hospital. It was understaffed and underfunded, and running on equipment that was 3 procurement cycles out of date. But the people in it mostly tried. That counted for something. Claire had worked in places where the people did not try at all, and the difference was significant. She had been at Hartwell for 11 months. Before Hartwell, she had been nowhere that existed on any official record. Her ID badge said, Merritt, CRN. It had her photo, her employee number, her department. It said nothing else. The badge was accurate, as far as it went. Holt appeared at the edge of her station. He set his coffee cup down on her desk without asking. He looked at her screen. "Your charting is behind." "By 12 minutes, she said. "The system was down earlier." "I don't care about the system, I care about the chart." She looked at him, not with anger. With the specific, calibrated patience of someone who had sat across a table from people who were trying very hard to make her break and had walked away from all of them. "I'll have it updated before the incoming," she said. He stared at her for a moment. Something in her stillness seemed to bother him in a way he could not name. He picked up his coffee and left. Claire let out a breath she had not been holding. That was a habit. Breath control was a habit. Everything was a habit when you had trained long enough. She updated the chart. The rain got louder. Across the bay, the charge nurse, a stocky woman named Val with 20 years on the floor, caught Claire's eye and offered a small shake of her head. The kind of shake that meant something like, "Don't let him get to you." Claire nodded once in return. Val had been one of the first people at Hartwell to actually look at Claire. Not through her, at her. It had taken Claire 3 months to let herself be seen, even that much. Old habits. The trauma center at this hour had its own specific sound. The low hum of equipment, monitors cycling, the intermittent squeak of rubber soles on linoleum, the abbreviated conversations of people who had been awake too long and had learned to communicate in half-sentences and looks. Claire had worked in buildings with far greater ambient noise and far more threat per square foot. She had worked in buildings without walls, without power, without anything resembling a supply chain. She had worked in total silence, which was the worst kind, because total silence in the wrong context meant something had changed and you had not yet identified what. The trauma center was not silent. The trauma center was manageable. She kept that framing. Manageable. The word she used for spaces she had chosen to inhabit, rather than spaces she had been assigned. At 11:52 p.m., the radio on the wall crackled. "Hartwell Trauma. This is Medevac 7. We have 2 inbound. ETA 4 minutes. First patient, adult male, blast concussion, lacerations, stable. Second patient, adult male, gunshot wound, femoral region, hemorrhage control in progress, pressure critical. Advise you prepare for surgical." The room snapped into a different register. Holt was already moving. He was good in the moments when the machine ran. Whatever was hollow in him day to day, something switched on when the urgency came. She had seen it before in men who were only truly alive in the edge moments. She knew that feeling better than she would ever say. "Bay 2 and Bay 3, Holt called. "Surgical prep on Bay 3. I want type and cross, 2 large-bore IVs, O-neg running before they hit the door." Claire was already moving, not toward intake documentation, toward Bay 3. Quiet, efficient, no announcement, no wasted motion. The IV setup was ready before the surgical resident finished gloving. O-neg line running, pressure checked, taped off. Holt did not tell her to move. He also did not say thank you, neither registered. The helicopter hit the pad at 11:56 p.m. Claire stood at the edge of Bay 3. She had her hands clasped in front of her at waist height. Her auburn hair was up in a loose bun, a few strands loose around her face. Her bright blue scrubs were worn and clean. She looked like exactly what her badge said she was. The doors opened. The first patient came through on a gurney moving fast. Male, mid-30s, athletic build, close-cropped hair, wearing the remnants of tactical gear that had been partially cut away. Standard lacerations, contusion on the left orbital. He was conscious, and he was not happy about it. The second patient was worse. He came through pale and not entirely present. The wound was high on the inner thigh, combat tourniquet applied above it, tightened hard. Whoever had applied that tourniquet had done it correctly. The junctional area was the issue. The compression above was holding the main bleed, but the inguinal fold was showing pressure suggesting collateral damage. Claire looked at the wound for exactly 3 seconds. She had seen this wound before. Not in a trauma center. In a river valley. In the dark. With no equipment and 2 hours until any medevac was coming. She reached for her gloves. The first patient, the conscious one, sat up on his gurney and grabbed her wrist. He was not rough about it, but he was firm. "Not you," he said. His voice was flat and certain, the voice of a man accustomed to giving direction that got followed. "Get me a surgeon, a real one. No offense, sweetheart, but my guy needs more than a nurse." The room went very quiet. Claire looked at his hand on her wrist. Then she looked at his face. He was watching her with the direct, assessing look of an operator. She knew that look. Claire had worn it for 15 years. She kept her voice completely level. "Sir, I need you to release my wrist." He released it, but he did not back down. "Where's the attending?" "Right here." Holt appeared behind her. He assessed the room with the rapid clinical scan that was genuinely one of his best qualities. "Step back, Merritt. I'll take primary." She stepped back. Claire stood at the edge of the bay with her hands clasped, watched Holt assess the wound, watched him call for the wrong gauge, and she started counting down from 10. The countdown reached 3 before Holt made the call she already knew was wrong. "Pack it," he said. "Standard gauze, pressure hold." Claire's hands tightened against each other at her waist. Standard gauze on a femoral junctional bleed with collateral involvement was not wrong in the way that would kill a patient immediately. It was wrong in the way that would allow the situation to quietly deteriorate over the next 6 to 8 minutes, until suddenly the options narrowed to one. She had seen that specific calculation resolve badly before. Men had died while it resolved, in the dark, with her hands on them. Breathe in, breathe out. The conscious patient. The operator who had grabbed her wrist was watching Holt work. His name tape had been cut away with his gear, but Claire had already catalogued his physical indicators, the conditioning, the specific distribution of muscle mass, the way he held himself even while injured, spine straight, weight balanced, ready. The faded scar along the left jaw that had the particular geometry of a fragmentation wound. She knew what unit he was from. She had not said so. "Heart rate is climbing," the resident called. 110, 115. "He's agitated from the flight," Holt said without looking up. "Increase the drip." The resident hesitated. Claire could see the hesitation from where she stood. The resident was young and not yet broken of the habit of noticing when something was wrong. "Good. Keep that habit." "BP is dropping," the resident said, carefully, like he was testing whether it was allowed to be true. 88 over 60. Holt's jaw tightened. He looked at the wound again. Claire saw the moment he realized the standard pack was not controlling it. She saw it in the way his body changed, the subtle contraction of the shoulders that meant recalibration. She saw the half-second of something that looked like uncertainty before the armor came back up. Holt was not a bad surgeon. He was an exhausted one. In trauma, the difference between those two things could be very small. Val appeared at Claire's shoulder. The charge nurse moved the way experienced nurses move, without announcement, without fanfare, appearing exactly where she was needed. "Holt's losing it," Val said under her breath. "He knows the protocol," Claire said, equally quiet. "Then why is he running standard pack on a junctional?" Claire did not answer that. The monitor alarm began. A flat, consistent tone that was not the catastrophic sound, but was the sound that preceded it if nothing changed. Holt looked up. "Get me a vascular consult now." "Vascular is 20 minutes out," someone called back. "Dr. Reyes is in OR2. The mathematics of the situation resolved themselves in Claire's head in approximately 4 seconds. 20 minutes for vascular. 6 to 8 minutes of controlled deterioration before the bleed exceeded what pressure alone could hold. A BP already at 88 and falling. A patient with the physiological reserve of a trained operator, which was significant, but not infinite. There was one intervention that could bridge the gap. It was not a standard nursing procedure. It was something she had learned in a basement facility at Fort Bragg in a training rotation that did not appear in any official curriculum. Taught by a physician's assistant who had deployed to 6 countries and whose name she was not authorized to repeat. She had performed it 4 times in field conditions, once on herself. The monitor climbed to 120. "Pressure is failing," the resident said. Holt looked at his hands, just for a second. The look of a man doing rapid and uncomfortable math about what he could and could not manage in the next 3 minutes. Claire unclenched her hands. She walked to the cart. She pulled the specific items she needed, with no hesitation and no extra motion. Combat gauze impregnated with kaolin hemostatic agent, 2 units, 10-inch by 4-inch. A sterile field pack. Gloves, size 7. Not 6.5, which was what the cart usually stocked for nursing staff. She had restocked those herself 3 weeks ago. Nobody had asked why. Holt's voice came from behind her. "Merritt," I said, "step back." She was already gloved. She turned. She looked at him directly, not with challenge, not with hostility, with the specific quality of presence that had once caused a general to stop mid-sentence in a briefing room and say, without knowing why, "Who is that?" "Dr. Holt," she said. "The junctional fold is involved. Standard compression will not hold the collateral. You need direct pelvic counterpressure with hemostatic packing, held manually, minimum 90 seconds. I can do that while you manage the primary." Silence. Holt stared at her. "Where did you learn that?" "It's in the TCCC protocol update from 2019, she said. Section 4, junctional and inguinal hemorrhage. This was true. It was in that document. It was not typically known by floor nurses at Level 1 trauma centers in the Virginia suburbs. The monitor hit 1:30. Holt looked at his patient. He looked at the monitor. He looked back at Claire. "Do it," he said. She was already moving. The packing went in with the precision of someone who had done this in the rain, in the dark, at altitude, on a moving vehicle, and once in a room that was actively on fire. The pressure she applied was exact. The angle of counter-pressure against the pelvic structure was exact. Her hands did not shake. They never shook in the field. The monitor began to fall. 128, 122, 115. "Hold that," Holt said, and something in his voice had changed. Something he was not ready to name yet. "I have it," Claire said. The conscious patient, the operator on the gurney behind her, had been watching everything. She felt his eyes on the back of her neck. She kept her focus on the wound. 110. 105. "BP stabilizing," the resident said, unable to keep the relief out of his voice entirely. "Pressure holding," Claire confirmed. "Collateral is sealing." The room breathed. Holt worked the primary. His hands were good when they were working, genuinely skilled beneath the exhaustion. Fast and clean, no wasted motion. They worked in a silence that was not uncomfortable. 2 minutes in, the patient's color had improved. At 3 minutes, his vital signs had crossed back into survivable territory. Claire maintained the pressure for a full 90 seconds past stabilization, then released in a controlled sequence, monitoring the wound response in 10-second intervals. Holt watched her do this without speaking. When she stepped back and removed her gloves, the operator on the second gurney was sitting up. He was staring at her left forearm. During the pressure work, when both her hands had been at the wound at full extension, her sleeve had ridden up 3 inches past the wrist. 3 inches was enough. She saw the direction of his gaze before she registered what he was seeing. She pulled her sleeve down. It was 1 second too late. The operator's face had gone through 3 distinct expressions in the space of 2 seconds. Recognition. Disbelief. Something that was not quite fear but was adjacent to it. He knew that tattoo. He had seen it once before. In a joint operations briefing room. On the forearm of a woman in civilian clothes who had entered the room after all the generals. And who all the generals had stood up for without being told to. He had not been given her name. Nobody in that room had been given her name. He swung his legs off the gurney. "I need to make a call," he said. "Sir, you are not cleared for—" the resident started. "I need to make a call," he said again. Not louder, but different in a way that stopped arguments. The resident went quiet. Claire was already at the documentation station. Her back was to the room. Her hands were on the keyboard. Her expression, if anyone had been watching closely enough, had gone very still in the way of something that has been discovered and is deciding what to do about that. Behind her, she heard the operator's voice, low and urgent, talking to someone on a phone produced from somewhere inside his destroyed gear. She heard him say 3 words before she stopped letting herself hear. 3 words she had not heard in 14 months. 3 words that had a specific and involuntary effect on her nervous system, even now, that no amount of discipline could entirely prevent. 3 keystrokes, a single breath through her nose. Then she waited. At 12:18 a.m., A man in civilian clothes walked through the trauma center's main entrance. He was not a patient. He moved through the lobby the way certain people move through spaces, with a precise awareness of every exit, every camera position, every person who might be paying attention. He was tall, somewhere around 6'2", with the kind of physical stillness that read as calm to most people, and read as something considerably more specific to Claire. She had clocked him from the documentation station before he made it 15 feet past the doors. She kept typing. Her heart rate was elevated by approximately 12 beats per minute. She knew this without taking her own pulse. She knew her own body the way a pilot knows an aircraft, not by feeling, but by instrument, by the accumulation of 10,000 hours of monitored response. 12 beats was manageable. She had functioned on much higher. The man in civilian clothes spoke briefly to the front desk. The front desk called back to the trauma bay. Val appeared at Claire's shoulder. "There's someone asking for the attending," Val said. "Federal ID. He's asking about the patients we just received." "Tell Dr. Holt," Claire said. "He's asking for the nurse who worked Bay 3. Claire's fingers paused on the keyboard for one beat. Then they resumed. "Tell him I'm completing documentation," she said. Val looked at her for a moment with the specific attention of a woman who had spent 20 years watching people under pressure and had developed an accurate sense for when ordinary stress ended and something else began. She walked back to the front without pushing it. Claire finished the chart entry. Chart saved, screen closed. Claire sat with her hands flat on the desk and did something she had not done in 14 months. She ran a threat assessment on her current position. Exits, 2 primary, 1 secondary through the supply corridor. Witnesses, 11 staff currently visible, 4 with direct sightline to her position. Complicating factors, 1 operator with a positive ID on an insignia that should not exist in a civilian trauma center. 1 unknown federal operative in the lobby. 1 trauma surgeon who had watched her perform a procedure outside her documented scope of practice. She had been burned before. Not often. 4 times in 15 years of operational work. Each time, the initial breach had come from something small, a word used in the wrong company, a reaction a half-second too fast, a skill displayed in a context where it did not belong, a sleeve that rode up 3 inches. Up, the supply corridor route, through the central bay, moving at the pace of a nurse on rounds. A chart lifted from the rack set back down, around the corner. Holt was already there. He was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and his coffee in his right hand, watching the corridor door the way he watched things when he was thinking instead of reacting. "The federal people are asking for you," he said. "I heard. They're not asking like it's optional." She said nothing. Holt looked at her for a moment, the look of a man assembling something he had been collecting pieces of without realizing it. The supply restocking 3 weeks ago. The fact that she had never once asked him to explain a procedure. The way she stood in the room during mass casualty drills, the slight shift in posture, the orientation of her body toward threats that had not materialized yet. "The SEAL in Bay 2, Holt said, "asked me a question before they moved him." She waited. "He asked me how long you'd been working here." 11 months, she said. "That's what I told him." Holt uncrossed his arms. "He asked where you worked before." "St. Catherine's in Roanoke," she said. "It's on my application." He said that's not what he meant. Claire looked at the door at the end of the corridor. Holt said, "Merritt. What you did in Bay 3, that pressure technique, the packing angle, I've seen it once before in my career. At a trauma conference, the presenter was an Army surgeon with 4 combat deployments. He introduced it as a battlefield protocol that doesn't get taught in civilian programs." He paused. "He also told me, when I asked where it came from, that the original training documentation was classified." Claire turned back to face him. She gave him the full attention that she usually parceled out carefully, because full attention was a resource, and resources were finite. His face was not hostile. It was tired and uncertain, and underneath both of those things, genuinely curious in the way of a man who had spent long enough in medicine to recognize real competence and take it seriously regardless of its source. "Your patient is stable," she said. "Blood pressure is 108/70 and climbing. The hemostatic pack will hold for 6 hours minimum. He needs vascular when Reyes is out of OR2, but it's not urgent anymore." Holt stared at her. "That's not an answer to what I was asking." "I know." She walked past him toward the main bay. The federal agent was standing at the edge of the nursing station when she came through the door. He was mid-40s, compact build, the kind of face that was professionally unmemorable until you found the eyes, and the eyes were not unmemorable at all. He was holding a badge she recognized, not the agency. She had worked adjacent to a dozen agencies. It was something in the format of the credential itself, a specific laminate quality, an absence of certain identifying numbers that should have been present. She stopped 4 feet from him. "Ms. Merritt," he said. "That's right. I have a few questions about the patients you received tonight." "You'll need to speak with patient relations," she said. "HIPAA applies to federal inquiries the same as—" "I'm not asking about their medical condition." He looked at her left forearm, at the sleeve pulled all the way to the wrist. She held his gaze. He said, "There's a name I'd like you to confirm or deny. Colonel Sarah Christine Harlow, formerly attached to a unit that I am not going to name in this location." The trauma bay was suddenly very loud. Monitor sounds, staff voices, the ambient noise of a functioning emergency department at 1 in the morning. All of it was very far away. Claire stood in the silence at the center of it. She had not heard that name in 14 months. That name was hers, not the name on the badge, not the name on the apartment lease in Falls Church, not the name on the Virginia nursing license issued 18 months ago under a social security number that was real in every way a social security number could be made real. The other name, the one in files that did not officially exist, attached to an operational record that spanned 4 continents, 12 years, and a number of outcomes she was not going to think about in a civilian trauma bay at 1 in the morning. She looked at the man with the badge. She said nothing. He said, "I was sent by someone who needs to speak with you, tonight if possible." She looked at the badge again, at the specific absence in its format. "Who sent you?" she said. He said a name. 2 syllables, a name she had not heard in 14 months, a name she had not expected to hear in this context, a name that carried with it a specific weight of history that she was not prepared for, not here, not at 1 in the morning in a trauma bay in Virginia with the smell of blood still on her gloves and a patient in Bay 3 who was alive because of what her hands still knew how to do. She could feel the tattoo beneath her sleeve, the way you feel a scar. Not pain, but presence. The insignia of the intelligence support activity. The unit so deeply buried within the Joint Special Operations Command that most general officers had never been briefed on its existence. The unit that did not recruit. The unit that found you and asked once, and if you said no, you never heard from them again. And if you said yes, you disappeared from every official record and became something the government could neither confirm nor deny. The unit she had commanded for 6 years on 4 continents. She had left it voluntarily, with full honors, with a handshake from people whose names and ranks she was still not authorized to speak. She had left because she was tired in a way that had nothing to do with the body. Tired in the specific way of someone who has made decisions in the dark for long enough that the dark starts to follow them into the light. She had rebuilt herself carefully. A nursing degree completed in 18 months through an accelerated program. Her second graduate credential, the first having been in a field she was not going to name. A license. A job. A small apartment in Falls Church with a view of a parking lot that she did not mind because she had slept in worse places and the parking lot did not shoot back. 11 months. 14, if you counted the transition. She thought about the operating room drills at Fort Bragg. About a valley in eastern Afghanistan where the temperature was 4 degrees and 2 men were going to die unless someone made a decision without authorization and without the certainty of a good outcome. About a briefing room in Brussels where she had walked in after the generals, and nobody had asked her name because her name was not what mattered. What mattered was the assessment she had come to deliver. She thought about Bay 3. About a man with a blown femoral who was breathing steadily in a curtained bay right now because her hands had remembered what her paperwork had not been allowed to say. She also thought about Holt. The way his voice had changed in the supply corridor. The way he had looked at her with something that was not quite suspicion and not quite recognition, but was moving toward both. Holt was difficult and burnt through, and he left his coffee cups on other people's desks, but he was not stupid. He had been watching her for 11 months with the dull, half-conscious attention of a man who was too tired to ask questions, and tonight, something had shaken him awake. He would ask the questions now. She could not control that. She could control almost nothing about the next 24 hours, which was a condition she was intimately familiar with, and which she handled the same way she always had. One decision at a time, one foot, then the other. The agent, the bay, Val at the nurse's station, watching with careful, respectful distance, the curtain where the operator was, the man who had grabbed her wrist and told her she was not enough, the man who had seen the tattoo and gone pale and made a phone call in the voice of someone reporting something he had not expected and was not sure how to process. She thought about the physician in the basement facility in Northern Virginia who had offered to remove the tattoo and told her, "Some marks are structural. You take them off, and you take something with them." She had believed him then. Standing in this bay, at this moment, she was beginning to understand what he had actually meant. Not that the mark itself was structural, that what it stood for was 12 years and 143 operations and 4 continents, and a number of moments where the difference between what happened and what could have happened was her presence in a specific location making a specific decision. 11 months of bright blue scrubs and fluorescent lights, and a documentation station, and a trauma surgeon who left his coffee cups on her desk. The agent was still watching her. He was very patient. She noticed that. Good operatives were patient. The ones who had really done the work could wait. She had once waited 41 hours in a hide position in the mountains of northern Pakistan without moving. Another moment was nothing. She looked at him. "Give me 10 minutes to complete my documentation," she said. "Of course," he said. Back to the station. Seated. Chart open. 4 seconds with her eyes on the screen. Then she typed 3 lines. She saved it. Outside the window, the rain had stopped. The parking lot lights reflected on wet asphalt in long, fractured lines. The city sat quiet and ordinary around the building, full of people sleeping and dreaming in the comfortable assumption that the distance between ordinary life and the other kind was greater than it actually was. She had known for a long time that the distance was very small. Up. Sleeve smoothed down to the wrist, back to the center of the bay. The agent was exactly where she had left him. 2 feet from him, she stopped. Direct eye contact. "I'm ready," she said. Behind her, in the silence of Bay 3, a monitor beeped steadily. 1 beat at a time. The sound of a man still alive. The sound, if she was being honest with herself, of the life she had built here, cracking cleanly down the middle like ice under weight. She had known it was fragile, known from the first day, chosen it anyway. The room they took her to was not a break room. It had been a break room at some point. There was a coffee maker in the corner and a laminated fire evacuation map still taped to the wall. But someone had set up a folding table with a secure communications unit on it, and the 2 men standing beside it had the specific quality of attention that told Claire this space had been converted approximately 40 minutes ago. She had done that conversion herself, in worse rooms, on shorter notice. The agent, whose name she still did not have, gestured to a chair. Claire did not sit. She stood at the edge of the room with her arms at her sides and waited. Her bright blue scrubs were still marked from Bay 3. She had not had time to change. She was aware of this, the way she was aware of most things, catalogued, filed, set aside. The door opened. The man who came through it was 61 years old, and wore civilian clothes that fit him the way civilian clothes fit people who have spent most of their adult life in uniform. He was large in the quiet way of men who had once been physically imposing and were now simply solid. His hair was white. His eyes were the particular gray of deep water. Claire's spine straightened by approximately 1 centimeter. Not from fear. From something older than fear. The kind of reflex that gets built in the first months of a particular kind of training and never fully goes away. No matter how long you wear blue scrubs and keep your head down and chart 12 minutes behind schedule. "Colonel," he said. "General Mays." Her voice was steady. "I'm not a colonel anymore." "You were never not a colonel," he said. "That's rather the point." He sat down at the folding table. He did not look at the communications unit. He looked at her. Brigadier General Thomas Mays had been the ISA's senior oversight officer for the last 4 years of her command. He had attended precisely none of her operational briefings, which was protocol. He had attended all of her debriefs, which was not. He had been the man in the back of the room who never spoke, and whom everyone else tracked without appearing to. She had respected him before she fully understood why. "How did you find me?" she said. "The SEAL did the work tonight, but we've known your general location for 8 months." She processed that without expression. "You didn't approach. You needed the time. That wasn't your assessment to make." "No," he agreed. "It wasn't." The acknowledgement sat between them. Mays did not offer apology. She did not expect it. This was not a space where apology was the currency. "What do you need?" she said. He folded his hands on the table. Outside the door, the trauma center continued. Monitors, voices, the persistent machinery of a building where people were trying to keep other people alive. "There's a situation," Mays said. "Developing. It involves a network we dismantled 4 years ago. Specifically, it involves the one component we were never able to fully document." She knew which network. She did not say so. "The component has reactivated," he said, "in the last 6 weeks. The profile is consistent with your original assessment from Aman, the one the committee declined to act on." She had written that assessment in a hotel room in Jordan at 3 in the morning after 40 hours without sleep. 8 pages. Every line verified against 3 independent source threads. Every conclusion supported by signals intelligence, human intelligence, and the specific pattern recognition that came from having spent 12 years watching how certain networks breathed. The committee had thanked her and done nothing. 12 months later, 3 Allied intelligence assets were dead. She had never filed a complaint. There was no mechanism for complaint. There was only the work. And the work went forward or it did not, and you did your part and released the outcome. She had released it. She kept her face neutral. "You want a new assessment," she said. "I want the original analyst," Mays said, "with updated access." "I'm a nurse." "You're many things," he said. "That is one of them." The door opened again. The SEAL came through it. He was moving better than he had any right to be, given what his body had absorbed in the last 3 hours. His arm was in a temporary sling. His face still carried the lines of pain that trained people learned to ignore rather than remove. He stopped when he saw her. He did not look away. His name tape was back on. His real one, not the tactical version. "Webb, Lieutenant Commander, United States Navy." His eyes moved to her forearm, then back to her face. "You saved my guy," he said. Not a thank you. A statement of fact, delivered with the weight of something that mattered more than gratitude. "Your guy saved himself," Claire said. "The tourniquet was applied correctly. By you, 40 seconds after we landed." She said nothing. Webb looked at Mays, then back at her. "The unit I lead has worked 3 adjacent operations with ISA assets in the last 2 years. Your people's fingerprints were on all of them. We never met them. We just saw what they left behind." He paused. "The work was flawless," he said. "Every time." There was no vanity available to her for that statement. She had trained herself out of vanity before she was 30. But there was something. A small, controlled acknowledgement in a part of her that she did not often hear from. 12 years, 143 operations. The work performed in the dark, left behind, never claimed. Someone had noticed. She filed that in the place she kept things that mattered and said nothing about. Claire felt the weight of that, the way she always felt recognition from people who understood the work. Not as validation, as something more structural, as the specific sensation of being seen by someone who knew what they were looking at. She was about to respond. The communications unit on the table made a sound. Not an alert. A specific two-tone pattern that she recognized before Mays even reached for it. Her body changed. Not visibly. From the outside, she simply went still. From the inside, something shifted that had been still for 14 months. A switch thrown in a room she had locked and left the key outside of. The activation sequence that 15 years of training had made involuntary. The part of her that never actually went dormant. The part that was already reading the room differently. That's the proximity signal, she said. Mays looked up. From the perimeter unit, she said. You have people outside. Standard security for a meeting of this, that's not your unit signal, she said. That two-tone is a contact alert. Your people are responding to something. Webb was already on his feet. Claire was already at the door. The corridor outside was wrong. Not loudly wrong, quietly wrong. The particular wrongness of a space where something has changed, and the people in it have not yet understood what. Staff moving slightly faster than the shift warranted. A resident at the far end making a phone call he was trying to keep quiet. The ambient noise of the trauma center running one register too high. Claire catalogued it in 3 seconds. She turned to Webb. How many does your team have on the floor? 2. Decker's at the main entrance. Ortiz is... He stopped. He had checked his phone. His face did not change, but something in it tightened. Ortiz missed his last check-in. When? 11 minutes ago. 11 minutes was a long time to miss a check-in. Claire looked at the corridor. She looked at the fire evacuation map she had memorized when she came through the door. She looked at Webb's sling arm and calculated the adjustment to his effective reach and response time. Your weapon, she said. He looked at her. You are not cleared to... Marcus. His first name. Direct. Your man is 11 minutes dark in a building with an active threat profile. I need a weapon, or I need you to stay in that room. Which one? A beat. 2. Webb reached under his jacket with his good arm and produced a compact sidearm. He held it out, grip first. She took it. Checked the chamber, the magazine, the safety, in a motion so smooth and automatic that it occupied no conscious attention at all. She was already moving. Down the corridor. Not running. Controlled pace. Purposeful. The pace of a nurse responding to a consult, which was the pace of a woman who had learned that running before you know the threat is how you become part of the problem. Val was at the nursing station. The charge nurse tracked Claire's approach and immediately tracked the thing in Claire's right hand that was not hospital equipment. Their eyes met. Val held her gaze. Patient in Bay 6, Val said, carefully. The way you speak when you understand that a conversation has more than one layer. Presented 15 minutes ago. Doesn't match his intake paperwork. How? His admitting complaint is chest pain. His hands don't match a cardiac presentation. Claire looked at Val. The charge nurse had 20 years on this floor. 20 years of watching people come through doors and reading the spaces between what they said and what was true. Where's his nurse? Claire said. I sent her on a break, Val said. 10 minutes ago. Val had gotten the nurse out of the room. Claire could have kissed her. Lock the station, Claire said. Move everyone who can move to the east wing. Anyone who can't move, lock their bay. She held the gaze steady. Don't call security yet. Why not? Because if he has a partner on comms, the radio traffic will tell him we know. Val looked at her for a moment with the expression of a woman filing a significant quantity of new information without stopping her hands. Then she turned to the station and began moving people with the quiet efficiency of someone who had run mass casualty drills enough times that the motions were in her muscle memory. Claire moved to Bay 6. The curtain was drawn. She stood outside it for 4 seconds, reading the sounds from within. Controlled breathing, low movement, the specific stillness of someone waiting. She came through the curtain. The man in the bed was not having a cardiac event. He was approximately 35 years old, fit, with the particular flat quality of focus behind his eyes that she recognized from 100 briefings and a dozen operational contacts across 4 continents. He had his right hand under the blanket. His left was loose at his side. His breathing was controlled. Not the uncontrolled, shallow breath of someone in chest pain, the deep, metered breathing of someone managing their physiological state on purpose. He looked at her scrubs. He looked at the weapon in her hand. His expression did not change. "I'm going to need you to show me your right hand," she said. "You're making a mistake," he said. His English was unaccented and precise. She noted the precision. "Show me your right hand," she said again. His eyes moved to her left forearm, the sleeve. The location of the tattoo he could not see, but had apparently been briefed on. She understood that in the same moment she realized this was not a coincidence, not a proximity event, not an asset stumbled onto a meeting by chance. He had come here for her, specifically. "Gray Fox," he said, using the old call name, the one that had not been in circulation for 6 years. "I was told you were retired." "I was told you were dismantled," she said. He moved. The right hand came out fast, and it was not empty. Claire was already lateral, the instinct preceding conscious thought by a full half-second, the body moving through patterns drilled into it so deeply they existed below the level of decision. The shot went past her left arm, close enough that she felt the displacement of air. She put 2 shots into his shoulder in controlled sequence and stepped clear of his fall line. He went down hard. The weapon in his hand clattered against the linoleum. She went down hard beside him before he stopped moving. Weapon secured, the motion precise and immediate, the way it is only when it has been practiced until it is not a motion anymore but a reflex. Hands checked, airways assessed, breathing confirmed. 2 shots, both shoulder. Controlled placement. He would live. She stood, took stock, hands steady, heart rate elevated but functional. No secondary threats visible, bay clear. The whole engagement had lasted 9 seconds. She knew because she always counted. Webb was in the doorway behind her, good arm braced on the frame, having apparently covered the corridor on a blown shoulder and a borrowed secondary. His face was doing something complicated. "Decker," she said. "Found him. East stairwell. He's okay. Knocked out. Not dead." She exhaled. 1 breath. Then she was already calculating the next 10 minutes. Local law enforcement response time. Hospital administration notification. The chain of reporting that would follow a weapons discharge in a level 1 trauma center. The official explanation that would need to cover the parts that could not be explained officially. Mays appeared at the corridor end. He looked at the room, at the man on the floor, at the weapon in Claire's hand, and the brass on the linoleum, and the fact that she was standing, and the threat was not. He looked at her, the way he had looked at her in dozens of debriefs, with the specific attention of a man who was building something complicated out of things that other people could not see. "Clear," she said. "Clear," he confirmed. Then quietly, "Welcome back, Colonel." She did not answer that, but she did not correct him either. The next 2 hours were bureaucratic in the way that aftermath always was. Forms, statements. The measured arrival of people with official credentials and the measured management of what they were and were not told. Claire sat in the converted break room and answered questions in the careful, minimal way she had been trained to answer questions. She gave enough to satisfy and held back enough to protect. It was a skill she had practiced for 15 years and had not lost in 14 months of nursing documentation. Holt appeared at the door at 2:40 a.m. He stood in the frame without coming in. His coffee was gone. His hands were in his pockets. He looked at her with the expression of a man who had spent 2 hours reassembling his understanding of a situation and was not entirely finished. "The staff are saying you shot someone," he said. "I did. In Bay 6. Yes." He looked at the room. At May's in the corner. At the communications unit. At Claire's blue scrubs and the weapon that had been taken from her by a federal officer 90 minutes ago and logged into evidence. "Who are you?" he said. The question was not hostile. It was not accusatory. It was the genuine inquiry of a man who had watched someone perform a classified battlefield pressure technique and then neutralize an armed operative in a trauma bay and was trying to understand what category of person did both of those things in the same night wearing bright blue scrubs. Claire looked at him for a moment. She thought about 11 months of documentation station, 12-minute charting delays, coffee cups left on her desk, being told to step back from a patient who needed her. She also thought about Bay 3, about the moment Holt had looked at the failing monitor and made the only call that mattered. Do it. He was not a good man in the easy, comfortable way of men who had never been tested. He was a difficult man in the complicated way of men who had been ground down by something larger than themselves and had kept showing up anyway. She respected that more than she would ever say. "My name is Sarah Christine Harlow," she said. "I hold the rank of Colonel in the United States Army, currently on inactive status. I was the commanding officer of a Special Operations Intelligence Unit that operates under JSOC. I have been working at this trauma center for 11 months under an approved cover identity." Holt stared at her. "The nursing license is real," she added. "I did the program. I passed the boards." He looked at the floor, then at the ceiling, then back at her. "The angiocaths," he said. "You restocked the size 7s. I needed them." "You knew you were going to need them." "I knew the patient profile we were likely to receive. I made a reasonable preparation." Holt sat down on the edge of the folding table because there was no other available surface, and his legs appeared to have decided they were done supporting the evening's full weight. "The charting delays," he said. "Were those real?" "The system actually was down," she said. "That part was real." Something crossed his face that might have been the beginning of a laugh, caught before it fully arrived. "Why nursing?" he said. The question landed differently than she expected. Not why here, not why this cover. Why nursing? She took a breath. "Because I was tired of work where the outcome was always some version of damage," she said. "I wanted to try work where the outcome was some version of repair." Holt was quiet for a long moment. "And is it?" he said. "Some version of repair?" "Yes," she said, without hesitation. He nodded, slowly, the nod of a man receiving information he had not expected and was going to have to live with. Mays moved from the corner. He looked at Holt with the brief, assessing attention he gave to most people. "Dr. Holt, everything you witnessed tonight falls under federal jurisdiction. The specifics of Colonel Harlow's identity and role are classified. You and your staff will be asked to sign appropriate documentation." Holt looked at Mays. He looked at Claire. "And if I have questions?" "You won't get answers," Mays said, not unkindly. "Then I have one statement," Holt said. He looked at Claire directly. "Whatever else you are, you're a good nurse. The patient in Bay 3 is alive because of what you know how to do. That is not nothing." The room was very quiet. Claire felt the weight of that specific sentence in a place she had not expected to feel anything tonight. She had carried the work for 15 years without needing to be told it mattered. Operated in silence and left no trace and asked for no recognition and received none. That was the job. That was the nature of the work. You did not do it for the acknowledgement. You did it because it needed doing, and you were the one who could. but something in the way Holt said it. A man who did not give compliments, who ran on fumes and managed on bitterness, and had still shown up every night and still made the right call in Bay 3 when it mattered, saying a true thing simply. At 2:40 in the morning, in a converted break room that smelled like old coffee, after a night that had broken open everything she had spent 14 months carefully constructing, he had seen her work. Not the classified record, not the operational history, not the rank or the unit or the 143, Bay 3, the work of keeping one man's blood inside his body, and he had called it good. She said, "Thank you, Dr. Holt." He stood. He straightened his coat. He looked at her one more time with the expression of a man who was going to spend considerable time processing this evening. Then he left. Webb came in as Holt went out. The sling was still on his arm, but he moved with the compressed energy of someone whose adrenaline had not fully metabolized. He looked at Mays. Something passed between them that did not require words. Mays picked up the communications unit and walked out of the room. Webb sat down across from her. "My guy's name is Rodriguez," he said. "Petty Officer First Class Daniel Rodriguez. Married, 2 kids. His wife's name is Amanda. She's a teacher in Virginia Beach." Claire looked at him. "He's going to go home," Webb said. "Because you know a pressure technique that isn't in any civilian curriculum. Because you restocked a supply cart 3 weeks ago with materials you were going to need tonight." He paused. "Because you never stopped being who you are, even when you were trying to." She looked at the door where Mays had gone. She looked at the table where the communications unit had been. She looked at her left forearm. "The network Mays wants to address," she said. "The Amman assessment. What's the timeline?" Webb's expression did not change, but something behind it steadied. "Developing," he said. 6 weeks at best before it's active. What do you need?" "Your eyes on the intelligence package, your assessment of the new behavioral signatures. And if it goes operational—" He stopped. "Say it," she said. "Command structure," he said. "The kind that doesn't get taught and can't be delegated. The kind that was built over 12 years of doing the hardest version of this work in the worst conditions available." Outside the window, Virginia was starting to lighten. Not sunrise yet. The specific pre-dawn gray of a world reconsidering what it had been. The trauma center hummed around them. Monitors, movement, the persistent, ordinary miracle of people keeping other people breathing one more hour. She thought about Daniel Rodriguez, 2 kids, a wife named Amanda who was probably awake by now, by instinct, the way military spouses learn to wake in the night. She thought about the valley in Afghanistan, the 4 degrees, the 2 men who came home because she made a decision in the dark. She thought about Bay 3 and her hands, and the moment the monitor began its long climb back toward viable. She thought about what Holt had said. "You're a good nurse, whatever else you are." She had spent 14 months trying to be only one thing, to put the other down like a weight and walk away from it, to belong entirely to this quieter work, this careful work, this work of repair. But the weight had not stayed down. It had followed her into Bay 3, into a supply cart she stocked 3 weeks in advance, into a pressure technique performed with the precision of 4 field repetitions in the dark, into a corridor where she moved through threat assessment the way other people moved through breathing. She was not only one thing. She had never been only one thing. The attempt to be had been honest. The attempt had also produced, in its 11 months, a patient in Bay 3 who was going to go home. A charge nurse who had read a room and gotten a colleague out and trusted a woman she could not fully explain. A documentation station where everything had been when it mattered exactly 12 minutes behind. She could be both, not easily, not cleanly, not without cost. But she had never done anything easily or cleanly or without cost, and she had done it anyway every time, because the work was the work, and the work was worth doing. She looked at Webb. "I need a condition," she said. "Name it." "This position, the cover. It stays operational." She looked at the door to the trauma bay. "The nursing license stays active. The Hartwell arrangement continues. He studied her face. That's an unusual request for a full operational return. I'm an unusual asset, she said. And this work matters. Both of them matter. She held his gaze. If you want my command, you take all of it, including what I've become in the last 14 months. Webb was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Rodriguez's wife is going to get a call this morning telling her he's safe. He paused. Because of you. Not just tonight, but because of who you are in a way that doesn't turn off. Claire looked at the window. The gray was deepening toward light. Mays will want an answer, Webb said. He has it, she said. She stood. Down the corridor, Val was at the nursing station where she had always been. 2 decades on this floor. A woman who could read the difference between ordinary stress and the other kind. Who had gotten a nurse out of a room without being told why. Who had locked down a wing in under 4 minutes using nothing but the quiet authority of someone who understood that some moments required acting before understanding was complete. Val looked up when Claire came through the door. She looked at Claire's face, at the sleeve pulled down to the wrist, at the posture that was no longer the slightly forward lean of someone making herself smaller than she was. She looked at all of it and said nothing. For a moment, they simply stood there. 2 women in a fluorescent-lit corridor at the end of the longest night the trauma center had seen in months. No explanation offered, none required. This was also a kind of language, the kind built out of proximity and attention, and the specific fluency of people who had both been paying close attention all along. Claire stopped beside her. I'm going to need a few days, Claire said. I know, Val said. The documentation for my absence. I'll handle it, Val said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, Bay 3 is stable. Rodriguez went up to surgical holding an hour ago. BP is 115/80. She paused. Just so you know. 115/80. A man who would go home. Claire looked at the bay, at the curtains and the monitors, and the linoleum that still carried the faintest trace of what had been there at 11:56 the night before. She rolled up her left sleeve. Not all the way. 3 inches past the wrist. Enough. The tattoo was small, if you did not know what it meant, a simple design. The kind of thing that could be many things to people who did not know. To people who knew, it was a flag. A specific and irrevocable declaration of identity, the mark of a unit that operated in the spaces between everything that was official and everything that was possible. The mark of who she was, all of it. She had tried to cover it tonight, and it had not stayed covered. It had come up with her sleeve in a bay where a man was dying, and it had been the truest thing in the room. Not her name, not her rank, not the operational record in files she was not allowed to discuss. Just that mark, small and permanent. All, and the thing she had chosen, and that had chosen her back, and that no number of months in blue scrubs had made smaller or less real. She had spent 14 months being half of herself. Tonight, she was all of it again. She looked at the tattoo for a long moment, long enough to feel the full weight of what it meant, what it had always meant, what it would continue to mean going forward into whatever came next. Then, she rolled her sleeve back down. She straightened. She said goodbye to Val with her eyes, the way operators say everything important, without words, without ceremony, in the half-second of held contact, that carries the weight of what there is no time to say. Val nodded once. Claire walked to the main doors. Webb was waiting outside with a vehicle and the specific patience of someone who understood that the moment a person takes to collect themselves before walking into the next thing is not wasted time. It is necessary time. It is the time that makes everything after it possible. The doors opened. The pre-dawn air came through. She stopped for one breath in the threshold. The trauma center behind her. The dark road ahead. Both real. Both hers. The distance between those two things was not as large as it appeared. She had known that for a long time. She stepped through. The air was cold and clean. The parking lot lights were still on, reflecting in the wet asphalt, but at the far eastern edge of the sky, the darkness had begun to separate from itself. Not light yet, just the suggestion of it, the world deciding. Webb was at the vehicle. He did not hurry her. She stood for one more moment in the threshold. Behind her, Bay 3 and Val, and the documentation station with its 12-minute delays, and a patient named Daniel Rodriguez, whose BP was 115/80, and who was going to call a woman named Amanda in Virginia Beach before this day was fully light. Ahead, the network from Amman, the assessment that had been ignored, the three assets who had paid for that silence, the work that was not finished and was not going to finish itself. Both of those things were hers. Both of them had always been hers. She was not divided. She was complete. Sarah Christine Harlow, Colonel, United States Army, in inactive status. Claire Merritt, RN, Hartwell Memorial Trauma Center. One person, two truths. One life, fully claimed, fully lived, no apology offered and none required. She stepped forward into the road. Behind her, the trauma center hummed on. Monitors, movement, people keeping other people breathing, 1 hour at a time, in the fluorescent light of a building that did not know and did not need to know what had passed through its doors tonight. Some of the most important work in the world looks like nothing from the outside. She had always known that. Now she was certain of it. She got in the vehicle. The door closed, and the road opened ahead of them, long and dark and full of the kind of purpose that does not require permission and does not wait for comfort and does not stop for anything less than everything. She was ready. She had always been ready. It just took a night like this one to remind her what for. The end. If this story reached something in you, hit that like button right now and let it show. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're listening from. Every single one of those comments gets read, and if someone you know needs to hear a story about a woman who never stopped being exactly who she was, even when she tried, share this with them today. Welcome to Secrets of Silent Badges. Subscribe and never miss what comes next. We're just getting started.